Welcome to the Telabs Optical LAN Basic Skills video using the PON Profile. The PON Profile allows for the creation of global policies to be software defined and dynamically allocated based upon real-time needs of the PON interface. The purpose of this video is to provide instruction on the creation and application of the PON Profile. The topics covered in this video will be an overview of the purpose of the PON Profile, a description of the various PON Profile parameters, and the process for applying the PON Profile. The PON interface is unique in the optical LAN network. This interface provides a fiber connection between the OLT and the ONT in the optical LAN system. The basic function of the PON is to provide an efficient shared transfer of data between the ONT's UniPort and the core of the switch. There are several options available that can be assigned to the PON interface that affect the behavior of the PON port. These features include the PON protocol, PON security, monitoring, and ONT-related functions. All PON interfaces are assigned a PON profile when they are created. The parameters set in this profile are dictated by the default PON profile established by the commissioning wizard. If an actively used profile is edited, the new parameters are applied to all PON interfaces that are assigned that PON profile. Care must be taken when making changes to working PON interfaces. It is recommended that changes be established in new PON profiles and then applied to the PON ports individually. To access the PON profile in the Panorama client, select the Profile icon. Select the PON Profile tab, then select the first icon to create a new PON profile. Typically, PON ports are set to discover unconfigured ONTs that have been installed on the port. ONT discovery allows for auto-configuration and bulk provisioning of unexpected ONTs. Alarms can be set for unexpected ONTs and excessive arrival violations. If an ONT arrives more than 10 times in 2 minutes, an alarm is triggered and the ONT will be put in quarantine. Quarantined ONTs will trigger an unexpected ONT alarm as well. Autoconversion typically stays active and will automatically match new ONTs to their type when they are configured into a pre-provisioned slot. In the PON configuration section, forward error correction can be used to lower signal-to-noise ratio on the PON. This can be used when experiencing higher than usual bit errors. It should be noted that enabling FEC will lower the data rate on the PON by 12% due to the overhead of the FEC redundancy bytes. PON type determines the PON protocol to be used, either GPON or XGS-PON. The bit error rate threshold determines the rate of errors that will trigger either a signal degrade or signal fail alarm. These typically do not need to be adjusted. Path protection integrates the current spanning tree state into the Type B path protection decisions and will switch the PON to the protection PON if it detects that the active path has been isolated from the network or connection to the ESU on the active side has been lost. PON reach defines the maximum distances of the PON. PON reach should be set to 20 kilometers unless greater distance is needed. Setting the reach to 30 kilometers will affect PON performance. In the bandwidth utilization section, a set of threshold crossing alarms can be established to create notifications of bandwidth usage on the PON. There are thresholds for both committed information rate and the non-guaranteed information rate. Lastly, select a unique name for the PON profile. It is recommended that the name reflect the new features that have been introduced into the profile. Select Apply to save the profile. Once the profile has been created, go to the Ports application. Select the PON tab. In the Profile column, select the new PON profile for the desired PON port. Click Apply to activate the change. When assigning PON profiles, a PON type is established. Note that PON ports on the OIU8 card should be set for PON types in pairs. Ports 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. If a PON profile is changed on the PON port and the PON type is changed, the corresponding PON port in the pair must also be changed so that the two PON ports have a matching type. The EMS will not allow provisioning of PON ports of these pairs with different PON types. This concludes this video. In it, we have learned an overview of the purpose of the PON profile, a description of the various PON profile parameters, and the process for applying PON profiles.